Hi, so I'm here with Dr. Helen Beckett today to talk about her role and career in child protection. Thanks so much, Helen, for agreeing to talk to us and share a bit about your career.
It's a pleasure. It's great to do.
Can you tell us first, where you work and what your official title is?
Yeah, so I work at the University of Bedfordshire and I'm a reader in child protection and children's rights. That's the kind of the academic title. And that's part of my role is that research role. And the other part of my role is I'm director of our research centre, which has a very long title that we are renaming in the new year, but we're currently called the International Centre Researching Child Sexual Exploitation, Violence and Trafficking.
Oh my goodness, does that have an acronym?
We get shortened to the International Centre, which doesn't then really describe our work, which is a lot of the reason for changing the name.
No, I understand. So can you tell us a little bit about what an average day is like for you then?
Yeah, well, I'm sure everybody gives the answer of there really isn't an average day, but I guess that is true across this field. For me, it can be so variable. So I can be out doing research, I can be meeting with children and young people who've experienced sexual abuse and learning from them about how we can better respond as professionals. I could be analysing the research, writing up a research report, or I could be out doing dissemination. So we're an applied research centre and we're all deeply passionate about doing research that makes a difference and not research for research's sake. So we spend a lot of time actually doing kind of speaking engagements. We do a lot of training of professionals and sharing kind of what we've learned from research with them and helping them think about how that might influence their practice. We also do policy work. I also do a little bit of teaching and I supervise doctoral students. And then there's obviously the behind the scenes part of being a director of a research centre, of kind of the logistics of running that. So in all honesty, every day is really different and every week is very different, but I guess that's what keeps it so interesting.
Yes, certainly keeps you busy, I expect.
Certainly that would be the one thing I could say is common across all days is that they're busy.
Fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit about what made you go into an academic career and specifically what made you go into an academic career in child protection?
Yeah, so interestingly, I was always very torn between going the academic route and going the practice route. So kind of when I was at master's level, oh goodness, nearly 25 years ago, I was torn between, do I go the research route, do I train to be a social worker? And actually I decided to go the academic route at that point, thinking I'd be a lecturer, really because of how I had been inspired by lecturers who taught me. I did my degree at Queen's University and I discovered social policy. It had just started being taught. And I was so inspired by the people who taught me and the fact that actually all of these social issues that I cared deeply about, that actually there was academic study around them. So that's why I decided to go the academic route. Now, interestingly, I then didn't go into teaching. Once I kind of started doing the doctoral work and doing the research, I discovered that research was really what I loved. So for the last 22 years, I've been doing research on children and young people's issues. I started out, my doctorate was in ethnography of youth homelessness, so kind of participant observation, spending time with young people who were homeless and looking at kind of the reality of their lives. And then I worked at Queen's for a couple of years on some juvenile justice processes. And then I went and worked with the Northern Ireland Children's Commissioner and I moved into then doing research and policy work at that stage and across a wide range of children's issues. But I've always had a real passion to particularly work in the field of child protection and particularly to work in the field of sexual abuse. So back 10 years ago, back in 2009, I left that role to go and do the first piece of research in Northern Ireland on child sexual exploitation that Barnardo's had secured funding. because we all know this, I'm sure, in practice. They were working in this field, they were saying this is what we're seeing, and government and people who fund were going, well, where's your evidence? So they got some money to do some research, and that's kind of when I particularly came into this field of working in child sexual exploitation, which I've done so then for the last 10 years. And I was going to say I love it, and I know that's probably a really strange description given what we're talking about, but I really do. And for me, a research career is not a career in research for research's sake. I just don't think I could go and do research in something I wasn't passionate about. But for me, research is the way that works for me to be able to make a change around these issues. And I guess what I particularly love, one of the underpinning principles of our research centre is participation of children and young people. And that's particularly what a lot of my research is on, is giving children and young people the chance to help us learn about what they needed and what we could have done better. And I just, for me, the privilege of my role is being that conduit from young people and what they want us to hear, and then being able to kind of stand in front of a group of professionals or put it in government policy to say, actually, this is how we do things better from a child's perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so important to have that voice of experience feeding into the research. And as you say, to have research and practice going forward together, you know, it's absolutely critical to make a difference.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I hope you may have a number of these actually, but I wondered if you could tell us what's been the most uplifting or positive thing that's happened during your career. We're always very aware of the negative stories around child protection, but the more I speak to people, there are just some fantastic inspirational stories out there as well. So I wondered if you could tell us about something amazing that's happened that stuck with you.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this. And I guess, you know, there's a few kind of big wins, so to speak, that jump to mind, but it's probably more about the cumulative small wins. So one of the most obvious things that sprung to mind is we were commissioned a couple of years ago because of our expertise, along with research and practice, to write the new government guidance on how professionals should be responding to child sexual exploitation. And that was just really lovely to have the chance to actually be taking the cumulative knowledge from ourselves and from others, so from research, from practice, from children and young people, and bring that together and have the chance in that guidance to actually be challenging a lot of the problems we know there have been in this field. So not recognising adolescents as being sexually exploited, but you know, talking about them making active lifestyle choices or prostituting themselves, and just to have the chance to actually write that national guidance that is going out and is underpinning everyone's response was a real privilege. And I guess, yeah, felt like a really significant opportunity to influence responses in the field. But I think it's also, for me, it's the small things, it's the things that happen on a regular basis that just really make you think what you're doing is worthwhile. You know, it's when I interview a young person, and at the end of it or after it, their worker tells me that actually that was really important for them, and they felt really pleased they'd done it. They felt listened to. Given we know one of the whole things around abuse is silencing and is taking power away, to have the opportunity in how we engage with children and young people to offset those dynamics and to let them, as they would tell us, you know, to have the chance of turning something that was really awful for them, trying to take something positive out of it, of making things different for other young people in the future. I mean, that's what brings the smile to your face and makes you do it. Or when we train, as we did a few weeks ago, and at the end of the day, someone comes up and says, I hadn't been realising that actually, without thinking about it, I'm saying things and I'm doing things with the young person that might be suggesting I think they're somehow responsible for what happened to them, and I'm going to change the language I use, or I'm going to change how I do that. You know, so for me, it's that feedback of knowing that actually engaging with us as researchers, whether as a research participant or whether as someone that we kind of share what we've learned through research, is going to make a difference to a child or young person's life. So it's not all about the big wins, it's about that kind of keeping going and keeping disseminating and keeping making change, you know. And I have to say, as a researcher, I know sometimes people say it's really difficult to kind of get research out into practice. We are, every time we do training, practitioners are so open to learning. They're so open to hearing what children and young people want from them. And so it is a real joy to be able to actually kind of disseminate that stuff with them and help them think about how they might want to change things.
Absolutely. Gosh, there's a lot to reflect on there. I think that, yeah, it's interesting that, as you say, it sounds like actually participating in the research can almost be part of healing for some children and young people, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it is, and I guess that's the importance of doing research well. So one of the other things I do love about the part of my job is being able to kind of train up other researchers and to share our knowledge. You know, it's absolutely not that we have this perfect. You know, we're constantly still learning ourselves, but we do have a real expertise developed over the years within the centre about how do we do this safely? How do we do this in a way that, you know, can make it as positive and as safe an experience for a young person as we can. And so to be able to share that with others and to support others to create safe opportunities for young people as well is great.
Brilliant. So what are the main challenges you're facing just on the flip side now, say sort of in your career, in your role?
Well, there's the obvious one, isn't there? There's funding, which applies to everybody, and quite understandably, when things get tight, research is not the first priority. So that's something that we're constantly kind of working with, because you're trying to secure funding to do the research that you want to do. And I think for us, well, it's a challenge and an opportunity. You know, it's thinking about how do we make our research accessible. So we have no expectations that anyone's going to go and read a 100-page report from us, because we know everybody's far too busy. And actually the responsibility is ours to share our findings in an accessible way. So I think for us, it's trying to learn that in this environment when everyone is so stretched and so busy, how can we make research accessible and helpful and actually feel relevant to their roles, as opposed to something that just feels very distant and irrelevant to their lives. So I think there's that from a research perspective. I guess particularly if we think about kind of the subject area that I work in, child sexual exploitation, I think we have a lot of challenges and again opportunities, but around some culture change in this field. You know, we know from serious case reviews there are a lot of kind of very unhelpful myths and stereotypes and assumptions and judgments that have been made from on young people who experience child sexual exploitation. And I think in some ways we think we've moved beyond it, and then you're somewhere, you know, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and people say, yeah, no, we are still saying things like a child placing themselves at risk. And so for me, it's how do we challenge that culture? How do we start to think about adolescence in a much more kind of protective lens? So stopping making judgments on them that we wouldn't dream about making on a younger child. And for me, again, the research and the training is an opportunity through which we can try to have some of those conversations. And, you know, for us, that's a two-way process. It's not us coming in with all the answers. It's us learning from practitioners about the challenges they face and how we can learn from that as well, and learn together as to how we start to address some of this. But there's definitely some of the stuff I'm working on at the minute in terms of that is about moving beyond this kind of victim blaming narrative. I've just been writing in a new book that's just out about how do we actually reconcile the fact that in child sexual exploitation a young person might be actually gaining something at the same time being abused, and how do we not see that as then meaning it's not abuse, and how do we move beyond these kind of blaming narratives and risk assessments that are totally deficit based around the child. You know, when we've concerns about CSE, we complete a risk assessment that's all about the vulnerability of the child, you know, but we know a child is not exploited because they're vulnerable. A child is exploited because there's someone who's willing to take advantage of that vulnerability and inadequate protective structures in place. So it's just trying to think about how do we move forward, how we respond to adolescence, and how do we do that kind of within a system, and actually not even a system, within a society that really, you know, we don't really like adolescents. we tend to view them as problematic and troublesome, and that obviously is influencing how we respond kind of within child protection as well. So we're doing a lot of work kind of within the centre about how do we reframe some of these discussions and think about how we better protect adolescents.
Yes, it's a really difficult age, and the whole issue of exploitation is such a tangled web of manipulations that young people get trapped in. It's a real challenge. We had a talk from another researcher at a conference recently that was, her title was a direct quote from a social worker who had said, well, she didn't have to get in the car, and it was that, and you know, it was reflecting back because those people that she was working with really thought that they were supporting the young people as well. So it is really difficult, and it speaks, as you say, socially to absolutely how we view adolescence as a time of life and our expectations. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That judgment, oh, she didn't need to get in the car, is stuff I have seen throughout, you know, the 10 years of working in this field and continue to see. And it is about how do we stop recognize, you know, how do we stop blaming young people and making judgments of, oh, well, I wouldn't have done that. Because what we know is as soon as you give any inclination of that to a child or young person, they hear that you think they're to blame. And of course they're going to shut down, and of course they're not, you know, they're not going to be open to our responses. Why would you, if you think the person is blaming you and thinks you're someone responsible for the abuse you experienced?
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult issue, but it's fantastic that there are so many great people working on it, and hopefully we will make some inroads in keeping our young people a bit safer.
Yeah.
So just going back, you mentioned funding as one of the main challenges at the outset. So I wanted to ask, if resources weren't an issue, what would you change? I mean, we're recording this in the run-up to a general election, which will date it now that I've said that, but nonetheless, we are recording it in the run-up to a general election. So what would you like to change? What would you like the new Prime Minister to change? Or if you were the Prime Minister, what would you do to improve the lives and safety of children?
Well, if I could, I guess the researcher in me, it'll be no surprise that I'm thinking about kind of evidence and what's going on. But for me, the thing I would really love us to be able to do is to actually get our heads around the harm that children and young people are experiencing. You know, I know that kind of every time I go out and do research, you know, we learn about harm that is not reaching the system, that they are not telling professionals. And that's actually not actually coming through our child protection system at all. And there's lots of reasons for that. You know, there's reasons why young people don't feel able to kind of come to the system and disclose, and fear of what's going to happen if they do. But there's also stuff around the fact that actually they're experiencing a lot of sexual harm that they don't realise is harmful at all. Now that's back to a failure on our part around not educating correctly. You know, I recall doing research on kind of gang associated sexual violence and interviewing males, kind of young males, who in their heads are talking about sex. That's what the conversation was. Let's talk about sex and relationships and gangs, the good and the bad. And they're talking to me and they think they're describing sex and they're describing rape. You know, so, but they don't understand it as that, and equally some of the people who are experiencing it. So for me, I would really love to actually be able to find out directly from children and young people in a way that is accessible and in a way that is safe about the harm they're actually experiencing, because the problem is our system is responding just to the bits that we know as professionals, and there's an awful lot of it that we're not even getting to hear about. So that would be my dream thing, is a real, you know, a good study to actually understand the sexual harm that children and young people are experiencing, to get their perspectives on what would help, to get their perspectives on what might help prevent it, to get their perspectives on what actually response and support they need if they do experience something around this. Because I think it's only when we actually understand the realities of their lives and everything they're experiencing that we can start to build a system that responds correctly.
Well, Helen, that seems like it should be so achievable, but I know all the reasons why it's a lot harder than it sounds. But yeah, that would be fantastic. Okay, so what would you say to somebody just starting out in your field or your career path? We're thinking about trying to share more of our members' journeys and learning and so on. So, what do you know now, maybe, that you wish you'd known at the start of your career?
Yeah. So I think a number of things spring to mind when I think about this. I think firstly, do what you're passionate about and what you believe in. I know what I do is not for everybody. Equally, what other people do, I couldn't do. And we know that working in child protection is a difficult field. So I do think it's about find the bit you're passionate about, find the bit you really care about and you want to make a difference about. If you can, you know, particularly as a researcher, you can try to kind of decide what it is you're going to focus in on. So for me, on the days where it feels really difficult, on the days when you think, oh my goodness, there's nothing going to change, or, you know, this all feels too much. Excuse me, it's that passion for change, it's that belief that you want to do something about this that keeps you going. And I think, I guess, secondly, you know, find somewhere that you fit if you can. I am absolutely blessed to be in an amazing team of people who are equally passionate about this, who are incredibly supportive around each other, who all have similar beliefs. And that makes the world a difference. When I first started researching in this field, I was the only researcher. And that feels like a really lonely place. So making connections, and I guess if any researchers working in this field are watching this and want to connect in with us, because we are in a privileged position of the centre. We've nearly 30 staff now working in, you know, in this field, and we have that peer support. So I guess just to put the invite out there, if there are people working on their own without that, we're really happy to connect in with them and try to do some of that. But I guess the key thing for me when I reflect back is it's just about being yourself. Particularly in research, I think when you're trained and when you start out, there can be a sense of there's an ideal of what an academic looks like. And if I'm honest, I really struggled because I never fitted that. You know, I kind of thought, oh, I'm not a traditional academic. I don't think in that way. And that kind of felt quite difficult. But actually, I guess as my career goes on, I realised that, you know, there's room for lots of different approaches. And we all have different strengths, and it's okay, you know, to be good at some parts and less strong on others. And it's about developing your career in a way that does, you know, being open to learning, but really building on your strengths and actually being able to be yourself. I talk a lot when we train about kind of humanity in the system. You know, children and young people tell us that we know there are system processes and we know there are things you have to do, but actually we want to just feel that you care, and we just want kind of humanity back in the system. And I guess for me, that's what I feel about research. You know, we don't have to be this kind of objective, not influenced by anything perspective. We are meeting with children and young people who've been through horrendous experiences, and actually, you know, to be human, to care about what they've gone through is all okay. And that's also being a good academic. So I think for me, it's not feeling that you have to fit into one particular box, but finding the opportunities and the ways in which you can be you and you can bring your strengths and work within the field.
Thanks, Helen. What a fantastic note to end on. I think absolutely that human connection underpins everything in this field. And it can, for lots of different reasons, sometimes be a challenge, I think, as you said, but being yourself and bringing your whole self to whatever it is you're doing. It's a fantastic message for people starting out. Thank you so much for your time talking to us today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.